Your soulmate just made a final promise about you. And they're ready to stand by it. My beloved child. Your soulmate just made a final promise about you, and this time, something in their voice made everyone realize they weren't speaking from emotion alone. They had reached a decision. No more hesitation. No more allowing other people to decide what your connection should become. But here's what makes this moment so important: the promise wasn't made to you directly. It happened during a private conversation when someone close to them asked a question they had been avoiding for a long time. If things become difficult again, are you really going to stand by this person? For several seconds, your soulmate said nothing. Then they answered with a calmness that surprised everyone in the room. They said they had already lost enough time because of fear, confusion, and other people's expectations. And then came the promise nobody expected them to make. They said, "Whatever happens next, I'm not walking away from them again." But those words were only the beginning. Someone immediately challenged them, reminding them of everything that had gone wrong before. Your soulmate listened without arguing. Then they admitted something they had never been willing to say out loud. There were moments when they acted distant not because their feelings disappeared, but because those feelings had become too serious to ignore. They were afraid of making a choice they couldn't reverse. Yet recently, something changed. They realized that avoiding you wasn't protecting anyone. It was simply creating the exact future they were terrified of, a future where you eventually stopped waiting and built a life without them. That realization hit harder than they expected. Don't skip, because what they promised next explains why this conversation suddenly became so emotional. Your soulmate said they weren't asking anyone for permission anymore. They weren't promising that everything would instantly become perfect either. Their promise was simpler, and somehow much stronger: when the next difficult moment comes, they will stay, speak honestly, and face it instead of disappearing. Someone in the room quietly asked, "Even if standing by them costs you something?" Your soulmate didn't hesitate this time. Yes. And that single answer changed the atmosphere completely. Because there was one person listening who had always believed your soulmate would eventually choose the easier path. Instead, they watched them defend you with a certainty they had never shown before. But just when everyone thought the conversation was over, your soulmate reached into their pocket and placed something on the table, something connected directly to you. The moment the others recognized what it was, nobody said another word. What your soulmate placed on that table wasn't expensive, but everyone immediately understood why it mattered. It was something they had kept from a moment connected to you, a small reminder they could have thrown away countless times, yet never did. One person stared at it and quietly asked, "You still have that?" Your soulmate nodded. Then came an admission nobody expected. During the period when they seemed determined to move forward without you, they had carried that reminder with them. Not because they wanted to live in the past, but because every time they considered closing the door completely, it reminded them of one unanswered question: what if walking away from you became the decision they regretted for the rest of their life? Then your soulmate revealed what had happened only days earlier. They had been offered an opportunity to make their life simpler, to follow a path that would require them to stop looking backward and finally leave this connection behind. From the outside, it seemed like the sensible choice. Even people around them encouraged it. But when the moment came to say yes, your soulmate couldn't do it. They suddenly imagined you hearing about their decision after everything remained unresolved between you. That thought stopped them cold. So instead of choosing the easier path, they asked for time. And now everyone in that room understood why. Your soulmate wasn't confused anymore. They were preparing to prove that the promise they had just made about you wasn't another emotional statement that would disappear by morning. But there was still one difficult question waiting. Someone across the table leaned forward and said, "What happens if they don't believe you anymore?" Your soulmate's expression changed because they knew that possibility was real. They admitted you had every reason to protect your heart after the uncertainty you had experienced. They couldn't demand your trust. They couldn't expect one promise to erase everything. So they made another decision. Instead of asking you to believe their words, they would let their actions speak first. And apparently, that process has already begun. Before leaving the room, your soulmate mentioned one specific thing they planned to do, something that could finally show you exactly how serious this promise has become. But when the others heard what they were planning, one person immediately warned them, "If you do that, there's no going back." Your soulmate didn't back away from that warning. Instead, they looked directly at the person who said it and answered, "That's the point." Until now, they had always left themselves an escape route, a reason to delay, a way to retreat whenever the pressure became too intense. This time, they wanted their decision to be unmistakable. They revealed that they were preparing to have a conversation with someone whose opinion had influenced them for far too long. That person had repeatedly questioned whether choosing you was worth the complications. Your soulmate used to remain quiet whenever your name came up. But now they were ready to say something they had never said before: "You don't have to understand my choice. You only have to respect it." And that conversation happened sooner than anyone expected. When your soulmate finally spoke, the response wasn't anger at first. It was disbelief. "You're really willing to risk everything for this?" they were asked. Your soulmate corrected them immediately. They said standing by you wasn't about recklessly risking everything. It was about refusing to sacrifice something meaningful simply because other people found it inconvenient. Then they admitted their biggest mistake. They had spent too much time trying to keep everyone comfortable while leaving you uncertain about where you stood. That realization had been eating at them. Stay till the end, because the next question forced your soulmate to prove whether this new courage was real or just another temporary burst of emotion. The person challenging them finally asked, "So what exactly are you promising?" Your soulmate paused, but only because they wanted every word to be clear. They promised they would no longer let outside pressure determine how they treated you. They promised that if there was something difficult to discuss, they would speak instead of disappearing. And most importantly, they promised they would not make another major decision involving your future without being honest with you first. But then something unexpected happened. The person who had been challenging them became strangely quiet and reached for their phone. Your soulmate immediately sensed something had changed. After several seconds, the phone was turned around, revealing a message connected to you that your soulmate had never seen before, and what it said suddenly made their final promise even more important. The message on that screen changed your soulmate's expression instantly. It wasn't some dramatic confession from you, and that made it even harder to ignore. It was an old message someone had kept because of one sentence buried inside it. A sentence showing that, even during a painful period between you, you had never tried to turn anyone against your soulmate. When someone had questioned their intentions, you had simply said that there were things they were struggling to understand and that you hoped they eventually found the courage to be honest. Your soulmate read those words twice. Then a third time. They had spent so long wondering whether you remembered them with anger that discovering your quiet compassion left them speechless. But another detail in that message raised a much bigger question: why had it been hidden from them until now? The person holding the phone finally admitted they had intentionally kept the message private. At the time, they believed showing it would only pull your soulmate back toward you when everyone was encouraging them to move on. Your soulmate didn't explode. Their reaction was quieter, and somehow more powerful. They asked, "How many decisions did I make without knowing the whole truth?" Nobody answered. That silence told them enough. Suddenly, their final promise about you carried a different meaning. They weren't only promising to stand beside you when things became difficult. They were promising themselves that nobody would ever again control your connection by deciding which truths they were allowed to hear. And then your soulmate asked to see the entire conversation, not just that single message. What they discovered next made them sit down. There were several messages, spread across different moments, and together they revealed something your soulmate had completely misunderstood. You hadn't been waiting for them to become perfect. You had simply wanted clarity. There was even one moment where you had apparently been willing to hear them out, but your soulmate never knew because the opportunity never reached them. Their eyes stayed fixed on the screen as the weight of that lost moment settled in. Then they said something nobody expected: "I can't change what happened, but I can make sure it never happens this way again." They picked up their phone as if they were finally ready to act on the promise they had made. But before they could do anything, another message appeared on the screen, and this one had just been sent. The new message made your soulmate freeze before their fingers could even move. It came from someone who knew both sides of the story, someone who had stayed quiet while misunderstandings kept growing between you. The message was short: "Before you reach out, there's something about them you need to know." Your soulmate immediately called. At first, the person hesitated, afraid the truth might create even more tension. But your soulmate refused to accept another half-truth. They calmly said, "If this involves them, tell me everything. I'm done making decisions with missing pieces." What came next wasn't a warning against you. It was something far more emotional. Apparently, there had been a moment when you could have exposed something deeply embarrassing about your soulmate, and you chose to protect their dignity instead. That revelation hit them harder than anyone expected. Your soulmate had assumed your silence meant indifference. Now they were discovering that some of your silence had actually been restraint. You had opportunities to speak from hurt, yet you hadn't used their vulnerable moments against them. Your soulmate lowered their head and whispered, "And I thought they didn't care anymore." Suddenly, their final promise stopped being about proving something to the people around them. It became about becoming the kind of person who could finally meet your loyalty with equal courage. They told everyone that standing by you didn't mean pretending the past never happened. It meant facing the truth of it without running. Then they asked one question that made the person on the phone hesitate: "Did they ever say what they needed from me?" There was a long silence before the answer came. You hadn't asked for grand gestures. You hadn't demanded impossible guarantees. According to that person, what you wanted was remarkably simple: honesty, consistency, and the certainty that when pressure arrived, your soulmate wouldn't suddenly become a stranger again. Hearing that made everything click. Those were almost the exact words behind the promise your soulmate had made earlier. Without realizing it, they had finally reached the same place emotionally that you had been asking them to reach all along. Your soulmate stood up and said, "Then I know what I have to do." But instead of immediately sending the message everyone expected, they opened something they had written privately several nights earlier. And the first line revealed that this final promise about you had actually been forming much longer than anyone knew. The private note had been written on a night when your soulmate couldn't sleep, and the first line was painfully simple: "If I ever get another chance to speak honestly, I won't waste it." Nobody else had seen those words. Beneath them were several unfinished sentences, things they wanted to tell you but never had the courage to send. One admitted that they missed the version of themselves that existed when they felt safe enough to be honest with you. Another confessed that every attempt to convince themselves they were completely over this connection eventually collapsed. But the final sentence was different. It wasn't about missing you. It was a promise. If I come back into their life, I will come back prepared to stay consistent, not just emotional. That distinction mattered because your soulmate finally understood something uncomfortable about their own behavior. Strong feelings had never been the real problem. They had always felt deeply. The problem was what happened after those feelings became difficult. They would hesitate, overthink, listen to too many voices, and eventually leave you wondering whether anything they had said was real. This time, they wanted to break that pattern before asking anything from you. So they made a practical decision. They would first resolve one unfinished situation that had repeatedly created uncertainty between you. Someone nearby asked why they couldn't simply contact you immediately. Your soulmate answered, "Because I don't want to arrive with another promise while carrying the same old problem behind me." And that answer revealed how seriously they were taking what came next. They closed the note and walked away from the table with a completely different energy. There was no dramatic speech now. Just determination. Their first stop was a conversation they had avoided for months, a conversation with the person whose expectations had influenced several of their choices about you. Your soulmate made one thing clear: they were grateful for concern, but their relationship decisions would no longer be negotiated by committee. Then came the unexpected response. Instead of arguing, that person admitted they had recently learned something about you that had changed their own opinion. Your soulmate stopped immediately. "What did you learn?" they asked. The answer began with an event from your past that your soulmate had never heard about, and somehow, it explained why standing by this final promise could soon require far more courage than they had imagined. The person took a moment before explaining what they had discovered about your past. Years earlier, you had faced a situation where someone important gave you their word and then disappeared when keeping that promise became uncomfortable. You rarely spoke about it, but the experience changed what commitment meant to you. Suddenly, your soulmate understood why inconsistency had affected you so deeply. To them, disappearing during difficult moments might once have seemed like taking space. To you, it could have felt like history repeating itself. Your soulmate's face changed as that realization settled in. So every time I pulled away, they whispered, they didn't just see distance. They saw another promise being broken. And for the first time, they understood exactly what their final promise would have to overcome. Instead of becoming discouraged, your soulmate became more certain. They said they weren't going to use your past as an excuse to demand trust or expect you to immediately believe them. They would respect why you might question everything. Then they made their promise even more specific. If you needed time, they would give you time without disappearing. If you asked difficult questions, they would answer them without becoming defensive, and if outside pressure returned, they would tell you instead of quietly allowing it to change their behavior. The person who once doubted your connection listened carefully and finally said, "Then don't promise them forever tonight. Promise them something you can prove tomorrow." Your soulmate went completely silent because those words gave them an idea. They returned to their phone, but this time they didn't open the long message they had been preparing. They deleted several dramatic lines and replaced them with something simpler. They weren't going to overwhelm you with declarations. They wanted to acknowledge what had happened, take responsibility for their inconsistency, and give you the freedom to decide what happened next. But before sending anything, your soulmate added one final sentence: "Whatever your answer is, I won't punish you with silence for being honest with me." Their finger hovered over the screen. Then someone beside them noticed a detail your soulmate had completely missed. A notification connected to you had appeared earlier that day. When they opened it, they realized you might already know about the promise they had made. For a few seconds, your soulmate simply stared at that notification. It wasn't proof that you knew every detail, but it showed that someone from the earlier conversation had reached out to you. Their first fear was immediate. What exactly had you been told? Had someone explained the promise accurately, or had pieces of it reached you without the context behind them? Your soulmate almost reacted impulsively, but stopped. That was the old pattern: fear first, clarity later. So instead, they contacted the person responsible and asked one direct question: "What did you tell them?" The answer surprised them. You had only been told that your soulmate had finally defended your place in their life. Nothing more. The promise itself had been kept private. That gave your soulmate a choice. They could allow you to hear the rest through other people, or they could finally tell you themselves. This time, there was no hesitation. They sent the message they had rewritten, but they didn't hide behind vague words. They acknowledged that they had been inconsistent. They admitted that outside opinions had influenced decisions that should have been handled between the two of you. Then they explained the promise. They would no longer disappear when things became difficult, and they would never again let someone else speak for what they truly felt about you. Most importantly, they didn't demand an answer. They ended by saying, "I'm not asking you to trust this immediately. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove it through what I do next." After sending it, your soulmate placed the phone down and refused to chase the message with another one. Minutes passed. Then more time. Someone nearby asked whether they were worried you might never respond. Of course they were. But your soulmate said something that showed how much had changed: "Standing by my promise starts before I know their answer." If you needed space, they would respect it. If you were uncertain, they would face that uncertainty without running. And if you answered with something difficult, they would listen. Then the phone finally lit up. Your soulmate reached for it, expecting your name. But the message came from someone else. It contained only one sentence: before they answer you, there's one last thing, yo.